Can't wait for the show tomorrow night. That's what my best friend texted my fiancé last week. They had no idea I could see everything. When I stood up at the rehearsal dinner and started reading their messages out loud, the entire room went dead silent. Life has a way of teaching you that the people you trust most are sometimes the ones capable of the deepest betrayal. 6 weeks ago, I thought I was living in a fairy tale. I was 26 years old, a marketing coordinator at a tech startup in Austin, Texas, planning what I believed would be the perfect wedding to my college sweetheart, Marcus. We'd been together for 4 years, engaged for 8 months, and our wedding was supposed to happen this weekend at a beautiful vineyard outside the city. My best friend since freshman year, Jessica, was my maid of honor. She was the one who helped me pick out my dress, who threw me an incredible bachelorette party in Nashville, who stayed up late with me addressing invitations and arguing over seating charts. She was supposed to be standing next to me when I married the love of my life. I should have known something was wrong when Marcus started working late every night. He's a software engineer at a gaming company, and while crunch time wasn't unusual, this felt different. He'd come home after midnight smelling like expensive perfume, not mine. And when I'd ask about his day, he'd give me one-word answers before disappearing into the shower. The red flags started piling up about 2 months before the wedding. Jessica, who used to text me constantly throughout the day, became distant and evasive. Our weekly coffee dates turned into quick phone calls, then sporadic messages. When I'd suggest hanging out, she always had an excuse. Work was crazy. She was seeing someone new but didn't want to talk about it yet. She needed some space to figure things out. Marcus became a stranger in our own apartment. The man who used to surprise me with my favorite coffee on random Tuesday mornings now barely looked up from his phone when I walked into a room. Our wedding planning sessions, which should have been exciting discussions about our future, became tense affairs where he seemed annoyed by every decision we needed to make. "Do we really need flowers on every table?" he'd ask, scrolling through his phone while I showed him centerpiece options. "This whole thing is getting out of hand. Maybe we should just do something smaller." I told myself it was pre-wedding stress. Cold feet were normal, right? I'd read articles about how men sometimes pull away before big commitments. I convinced myself that once we got through the wedding, everything would go back to normal. We'd be happy again. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in early October. I was at Target picking up last-minute wedding favors when I realized I'd forgotten my wallet. I drove back to our apartment to grab it, expecting Marcus to still be at work. His car was in the parking lot, which was strange because he told me that morning he'd be staying late to finish a project. I climbed the stairs to our second-floor unit and put my key in the lock, but something made me pause. I could hear voices inside, Marcus's voice and a woman's laugh. My heart started racing. Maybe it was his sister visiting unexpectedly, but when I opened the door, the living room was empty. The voices were coming from our bedroom. I stood frozen in the hallway, my wedding favor samples scattered at my feet where I'd dropped them. The woman's voice was familiar, but I couldn't quite place it until I heard her say Marcus's name in a way that made my stomach turn. It was intimate, affectionate, the way I said his name when we were alone. Then I heard her clearly. "We should probably get dressed before Sarah gets home." Sarah, that's me. They were talking about me like I was an obstacle, an inconvenience to work around. And that voice, I knew that voice. It was Jessica, my best friend, my maid of honor. The woman who'd been helping me plan my wedding was in my bedroom with my fiancé in the middle of the afternoon talking about hiding from me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I stood there in my own hallway feeling like an intruder in my own life. Part of me wanted to burst through that door and confront them immediately. Part of me wanted to run away and pretend I'd never heard anything. Instead, I did something that probably saved my sanity and my future. I quietly backed out of the apartment, got in my car, and drove to a coffee shop, where I sat in my car and called in sick to work for the rest of the week. I spent 3 days in a hotel room, not answering calls or texts from either of them, trying to process what I'd discovered. Marcus sent increasingly frantic messages asking where I was, if I was okay, saying he was worried about me. Jessica texted asking if I wanted to go over final wedding details. The audacity was breathtaking. They were continuing the charade while carrying on their affair behind my back. On Sunday, I went back to the apartment when I knew Marcus would be at his weekly basketball game. I needed evidence. I needed to know how long this had been going on and how deep the betrayal ran. I started with his laptop. Marcus had always been careless with passwords. He used the same one for everything, our anniversary date. His email was a goldmine of information I wish I'd never found. Hotel reservations for nights when he told me he was visiting his parents. Restaurant receipts for expensive dinners for two during his supposed late work nights. But the worst part was finding a folder of photos on his computer labeled J, dozens of pictures of Jessica that he'd clearly taken in secret. Photos of her at my bachelorette party, at our engagement party, at family barbecues. He'd been obsessing over her for months. Then I found their text thread. The messages went back 6 months. 6 months of planning their affair around my schedule, around our wedding planning, around my life. They talked about me like I was a joke, a burden they had to manage together. Sarah wants to add another song to the reception playlist. Jessica had texted him in September. Should I tell her you hate country music, or keep pretending you're fine with everything? Just agree with whatever she wants, Marcus replied. Easier to keep her happy until after we figure things out. Figure things out. They were planning something, and it wasn't how to come clean to me. I scrolled through weeks of messages. They called me bridezilla for wanting input on my own wedding. They joked about how stressed I was getting over details that didn't matter anyway. Jessica sent him screenshots of conversations we'd had about marriage and commitment, and they'd laugh about how naive I was. The most devastating message thread was from the week after my bachelorette party. Jessica had sent Marcus photos from the trip, not the group photos we'd all posted on social media, but candid shots of me when I wasn't looking. Photos of me crying happy tears when the girls surprised me with a video montage of our relationship. Photos of me passed out in our hotel room after too many drinks. She really thinks this is going to be her fairy tale ending. Jessica had written, followed by a crying, laughing emoji. Marcus's response made me nauseous. Good thing she doesn't know fairy tales aren't real. They weren't just betraying me. They were mocking my joy, my excitement about marrying him, my trust in both of them. Every happy moment I'd shared with either of them had been turned into ammunition for their private joke. I took screenshots of everything. Every cruel comment, every lie they'd coordinated, every time they'd met up while telling me they were somewhere else. The evidence painted a picture of two people who didn't just not care about my feelings. They actively enjoyed hurting me. When Marcus came home that night, I was sitting at our kitchen table with printouts of their messages spread out in front of me like a particularly twisted jigsaw puzzle. Sarah, where have you been? I've been worried sick, he said, rushing over to hug me. I didn't move. I just gestured to the papers on the table. Sit down, Marcus. His face went white when he saw what I'd printed. For a moment, just a moment, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Not remorse, not shame, just fear of being caught. Sarah, I can explain. Explain what? I asked, my voice surprisingly calm. Explain how you've been sleeping with my best friend for 6 months? Explain how you've been planning our wedding while making jokes about how stupid I am for believing in us? Please, Marcus, explain. He tried every tactic in the book. First, he denied it. Those messages were taken out of context. Jessica was just being a supportive friend. I was misunderstanding their inside jokes. When that didn't work, he tried to blame Jessica. She'd been coming on to him. He tried to stop it. He was just being nice because she was my friend. Then came the gaslighting. You've been so stressed about the wedding. Maybe you're reading into things that aren't there. This is exactly the kind of paranoid thinking that's been driving me crazy. Finally, when all else failed, he broke down and confessed, but his version of the truth was carefully crafted to minimize his role and paint Jessica as the villain. It only happened a few times, he lied, even though I had evidence of months of planning and coordination. She kept saying you wouldn't have to know, that it didn't mean anything. I tried to stop it, but she threatened to tell you I'd cheated, even if I hadn't. Every word out of his mouth was another lie, another manipulation. He wasn't sorry he'd done it. He was sorry he'd been caught. The wedding is in 6 days, he said, reaching for my hands across the table. Can't we just get through it and then figure this out? I'll never see her again after the wedding. We can work through this. I stared at him in disbelief. He wanted me to marry him in 6 days, knowing what I knew, because canceling would be inconvenient. Marcus, I said slowly, there's not going to be a wedding. The next morning, I called Jessica. I didn't tell her what I knew. I wanted to see if she'd come clean on her own. Sarah? Oh my God, where have you been? Marcus said you've been MIA. Are you having a pre-wedding breakdown? I totally get it. I'd be freaking out too. Her voice was bright and cheerful, like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't been systematically destroying my life for months. Jess, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course. What's wrong? Is there anything going on between you and Marcus? The pause was telling, just a beat too long before she laughed it off. Sarah, what? No. Why would you even ask that? Did something happen? I found some messages between you two. Messages that suggest you've been more than friends. Another pause. Then her tone shifted, became defensive. Sarah, you're being paranoid. Marcus and I are friends because we both care about you. If our texts seem flirty or whatever, that's just how I talk to everyone. You know that. She was lying to my face with the same ease she'd been lying for months. So if I read you some of these messages right now, you're telling me there's an innocent explanation for all of them? Look, she said, her voice getting sharper. Look, if you want to sabotage your own wedding because you're having trust issues, that's your choice. But don't drag me into your drama. Drama. She called it drama. Jess, I saw you. I came home Thursday afternoon and heard you and Marcus in our bedroom. The silence stretched for so long I thought she'd hung up. Sarah, she finally said, but I cut her off. Don't. Just don't. I trusted you with everything. My relationship, my wedding, my future. You were supposed to be my maid of honor, and instead you've been sleeping with my fiancé and laughing about it behind my back. It's not what you think, she said, but there was no conviction in her voice anymore. Then what is it, Jessica? Help me understand how my best friend and my fiancé have been having an affair for months, and somehow I'm the one with the problem. Look, she said, her voice hardening. Maybe if you'd been paying attention to your relationship instead of obsessing over every wedding detail, you would have noticed that Marcus wasn't happy. Maybe if you'd been a better girlfriend, he wouldn't have needed to find connection elsewhere. I was speechless. She was actually blaming me for their affair. I was trying to help you, she continued. I was giving Marcus an outlet so he could stay in the relationship until after the wedding. You should be thanking me for keeping your perfect day from being ruined. The twisted logic was staggering. In her mind, she'd done me a favor by sleeping with my fiancé to keep him around long enough to marry me. Jessica, you're sick. You're actually sick if you think any of this makes sense. Whatever, Sarah. You've always been dramatic. If you want to throw away a good relationship because you can't handle that, men have needs, that's your choice. But don't expect me to pretend this is all Marcus's fault when you've been impossible to deal with for months. She hung up on me. I sat there holding my phone, stunned by the conversation. They both turned me into the villain in their story. I was paranoid, dramatic, impossible to deal with. My fiancé needed an outlet because I was such a terrible girlfriend. My best friend was doing me a favor by sleeping with him. The gaslighting was so complete, so coordinated, that for a moment I actually wondered if I was losing my mind. Maybe I was being dramatic. Maybe I was paranoid. Then I looked at the screenshots on my phone. The evidence was clear and undeniable. They'd betrayed me, lied to me, and now they were trying to convince me it was my fault. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. The wedding was supposed to happen on Saturday. The rehearsal dinner was Friday night at an upscale restaurant downtown. All our friends and family would be there, about 60 people total. Marcus's parents had flown in from Denver. My grandmother had driven up from Houston. Our college friends had taken time off work and booked hotel rooms. Everyone expected to celebrate our love story and toast our future together. Instead, they were going to get the truth. I spent Wednesday and Thursday planning my strategy. I contacted our wedding planner and told her the wedding was canceled, but I asked her not to spread the word yet. I wanted to handle it personally. I called the venue, the caterer, the band. Everyone got the same message. The wedding was off, but please don't tell anyone. I'd take care of the announcements. I printed out the most damning messages between Marcus and Jessica. I organized them chronologically to tell the story of their betrayal. I made copies for my parents, for Marcus's parents, for our wedding party. I wanted everyone to see exactly what kind of people they really were. Friday morning, I got my hair done. I put on a beautiful black dress I'd bought for our bachelorette party weekend. I did my makeup carefully and put on the expensive earrings Marcus had given me for my birthday. I wanted to look absolutely perfect when I destroyed their lives. The rehearsal dinner was at Meridian, a trendy restaurant with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lady Bird Lake. Marcus's dad had insisted on picking up the tab for the whole evening, which made what I was about to do feel even more satisfying. I arrived early and asked the maitre d' to seat me at the head table where I could see everyone. As people started arriving, the mood was festive and excited. Our friends were laughing and taking photos. Our parents were mingling and sharing embarrassing stories about us as kids. Marcus showed up in a navy suit, looking handsome and confident. He kissed me hello like nothing had happened, like we hadn't had a conversation 2 days earlier about calling off the wedding. "You look beautiful, babe." He whispered in my ear. "I'm glad we worked things out. Tomorrow's going to be perfect." I smiled at him. "It's definitely going to be memorable." Jessica arrived 20 minutes later in a stunning red dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She rushed over to hug me, gushing about how excited she was for tomorrow. "Oh my God, Sarah, you look amazing. I can't believe we're actually here. Tomorrow you're going to be Mrs. Sarah Mitchell." Her performance was Oscar-worthy. If I didn't know better, I'd think she was genuinely thrilled for me. Dinner was served around 7:30. The conversation flowed easily. Funny college stories, predictions about married life, toasts to our future happiness. Marcus's best man gave a speech about how Marcus had never been happier than he was with me. My sister talked about how excited she was to officially have Marcus as a brother-in-law. I waited until dessert was served and everyone had a drink in hand. Then I stood up and tapped my wine glass with a spoon. "If I could have everyone's attention for just a moment," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the restaurant. The room quieted down, faces turning toward me with expectant smiles. This was when the bride usually gave a heartfelt speech about love and gratitude and excitement for tomorrow. "Thank you all so much for being here tonight," I began. "It means the world to me to have all the people I love most gathered in one place." I paused and looked around the room, making eye contact with my parents, with Marcus's family, with our friends who'd traveled from across the country to be here. Unfortunately, I have to share some difficult news with you. There's not going to be a wedding tomorrow. A collective gasp went through the room. Confused murmurs started immediately. Marcus's face went pale. Jessica's hand flew to her mouth in what looked like genuine shock. "I know this is unexpected," I continued, "but I recently discovered that my fiancé and my maid of honor have been having an affair for the past 6 months. The silence that followed was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in that restaurant. I know some of you might find that hard to believe, so I brought some evidence to share. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder of printed screenshots. These are text messages between Marcus and Jessica, planning their affair around our wedding schedule. I held up the first page and began reading aloud. From Jessica to Marcus, dated September 15th. Sarah's going to be at her dress fitting until 6. Want to meet at the usual place? Marcus replies, already heading out. Told her I had to work late again. Marcus jumped to his feet. Sarah, stop. You don't have to do this here. I ignored him and continued reading. From Marcus to Jessica, September 23rd. She wants to add more people to the bridal party. Should I tell her we're already over budget? Jessica replies, just let her plan her dream wedding. She has no idea it's not happening anyway. The room was completely silent, except for my voice reading their betrayal aloud. I could see people's faces shifting from confusion to shock to disgust. From Jessica to Marcus, October 2nd. Can't wait for the show tomorrow night. That was sent last week about tonight's rehearsal dinner. I looked directly at Jessica, whose face had gone from red to white to green in the span of 30 seconds. They've been calling me dramatic and paranoid for wanting my wedding to be special. They've been laughing about how naive I am to believe in love and commitment. They've been planning their future together while pretending to help me plan mine. Marcus tried one more time to take control of the narrative. Everyone, Sarah's been under a lot of stress with the wedding planning. She's been having some emotional issues. Shut up! The words came out louder than I intended, but I was done with his gaslighting. Do not try to paint me as crazy in front of my family and friends. I have 6 months of evidence of your affair. I have hotel receipts, restaurant bills, and text messages proving you've been lying to me this entire time. I turned to address the room again. I'm sorry you all came here for nothing. I'm sorry you took time off work and spent money on travel to celebrate a love story that was never real. But I thought you deserved to know the truth about what kind of people you were actually celebrating. With that, I gathered my things and walked toward the exit. Behind me, I could hear voices rising, shocked questions, angry accusations, the sound of chairs scraping as people stood up. As I reached the door, I heard Marcus's dad's voice boom across the restaurant. Son, what the hell have you done? I didn't look back. I walked out into the warm Austin evening and got in my car. My phone was already buzzing with calls and texts, but I turned it off. I drove home to my empty apartment. Marcus was presumably still at the restaurant dealing with the aftermath of my bomb. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my couch in my beautiful black dress, feeling lighter than I had in months. The next morning, what would have been my wedding day, I woke up to 47 missed calls and 83 text messages. My mom, honey, I'm so sorry. Come stay with us for as long as you need. My sister, I always thought Jessica was a snake. Dad wants to know if you need him to go beat up Marcus. My college roommate, I can't believe they did this to you. You're a warrior for exposing them like that. Iconic, honestly. Marcus's sister, Sarah, I'm so ashamed of my brother. You deserve so much better. The whole family is disgusted with him. Several of our mutual friends had sent similar messages, support for me, disgust with Marcus and Jessica. Apparently, after I left the restaurant, Marcus's parents had demanded to see the evidence for themselves. When Marcus's dad read the messages, he told Marcus he was embarrassed to call him son and left the restaurant immediately. Jessica had apparently tried to claim the messages were fake, that I'd somehow doctored them out of jealousy. But when multiple people started looking at them closely, her story fell apart. She'd stormed out after Marcus's mom asked her point blank how she could betray a friend like that. There were also messages from people who hadn't been at the dinner but had heard about it through the grapevine. Word was spreading fast. Marcus and Jessica's affair was becoming local gossip. The only messages I didn't have were from Marcus or Jessica themselves. Both had been blocked since Tuesday. I spent my would-be wedding day in pajamas, eating ice cream and binge-watching reality TV. My sister came over with Chinese takeout and wine. My mom called every few hours to check on me. It wasn't the day I'd planned, but it wasn't terrible either. That evening, my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw Marcus standing on my doorstep with a bouquet of flowers and what looked like a letter. I didn't open the door. Sarah, please. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But we can work through this. I love you. I want to marry you. Jessica doesn't mean anything to me. I stayed silent. I'm leaving this letter for you. Please read it. Please give us another chance. I waited until I heard his car drive away before opening the door to get the letter. It was 3 pages of handwritten apologies and excuses. He claimed the affair was a mistake, that he'd been confused and stressed about the wedding. He said he'd cut off all contact with Jessica and wanted to go to couples therapy. The letter ended with, I know I broke your trust, but our love is stronger than this mistake. Don't throw away 4 years over a few months of bad judgment. We can have the wedding we planned if you can find it in your heart to forgive me. I threw the letter in the trash without finishing it. Over the next few weeks, I started putting my life back together. I moved out of the apartment Marcus and I had shared and got a small 1-bedroom place closer to downtown. I threw myself into work and started seeing a therapist to help me process the betrayal and manipulation I'd experienced. The hardest part wasn't missing Marcus. It was missing the version of him I thought I was in love with. The man who brought me coffee in bed and made me laugh until my sides hurt had never really existed. He'd been a carefully constructed facade designed to keep me happy and compliant while he did whatever he wanted behind my back. Jessica tried reaching out through mutual friends at first, wanting to explain her side and clear the air. When that didn't work, she started spreading rumors that I was vindictive and unstable, that I'd blown their friendship out of proportion because I was jealous of her. Most people saw through it. The evidence I'd presented was too clear, too detailed to dismiss. But a few people, mostly acquaintances who hadn't been at the rehearsal dinner, seemed to buy into her version of events. I realized I didn't care. The people who mattered knew the truth. The people who chose to believe Jessica's lies were welcome to her company. 3 months later, I ran into Marcus at a coffee shop near my office. He looked terrible, like he hadn't been sleeping or eating well. He approached my table cautiously. Sarah, can we talk? Just for a minute? I considered telling him to leave me alone, but curiosity got the better of me. 5 minutes, I said. He sat down across from me, and I was struck by how much he'd changed. The confident, charismatic man I'd fallen for looked defeated and hollow. I'm sorry, he said simply. Not sorry I got caught. Not sorry the wedding got canceled. Sorry for what I did to you. You didn't deserve any of it. It was the first genuine apology I'd ever heard from him. You're right, I said. I didn't deserve it. I know you'll probably never forgive me, and I understand that. But I want you to know that I realize now what I lost. You were the best thing in my life, and I threw it away for something that didn't even matter. What happened with Jessica? I asked, surprising myself with the question. He laughed bitterly. Nothing. The day after the rehearsal dinner, she told me she'd never wanted anything serious with me. She said she just enjoyed the thrill of the secret, the power of knowing something you didn't. When it wasn't a secret anymore, she lost interest. I felt a flicker of something. Not satisfaction exactly, but a sense of justice. Jessica had manipulated both of us, but at least I'd figured it out before I'd married him. I heard you moved downtown, he said. Are you doing okay? I'm doing great, actually, I said, and realized it was true. I love my new apartment. I'm up for a promotion at work. I'm training for a half marathon. I'm really, genuinely happy. He nodded, looking sadder. I'm glad. You deserve to be happy. When he left, I felt something I hadn't expected. Closure. For months, I'd been angry and hurt and confused. Seeing him broken and remorseful didn't make me want him back, but it did make me feel like the chapter was finally closed. The weeks following the rehearsal dinner were a whirlwind of emotions and revelations. Word had spread quickly through our social circles and extended families. The story had taken on a life of its own, with details getting embellished and distorted as it passed from person to person. Marcus's parents, who had always treated me like a daughter, reached out repeatedly. His mother, Carol, called me crying the day after what would have been our wedding. Sarah, honey, I am so deeply ashamed of my son, she sobbed into the phone. Richard and I didn't raise him to be this kind of man. We're mortified by what he's done to you. She went on to tell me that Marcus had confessed everything to them after I left the restaurant. The full scope of the affair, the lies, the manipulation, all of it. His father had apparently told him to pack his bags and find somewhere else to stay until he could figure out how to be a decent human being. We understand if you never want to see us again, Carol continued, but please know that you'll always be family to us. What Marcus did doesn't change how much we love you. The conversation left me in tears, not from sadness, but from a strange mixture of gratitude and grief. I was losing more than just Marcus. I was losing his entire family, people who had become genuinely important to me over the years. My own family's reaction was swift and decisive. My father, normally a calm and measured man, was furious in a way I'd rarely seen. When I called to fill him in on details I hadn't shared at the restaurant, his voice was tight with controlled rage. "That son of a bitch," he said, using language I'd heard maybe twice in my entire life. "And Jessica, I can't even wrap my head around what she's done. Your mother is beside herself." My mom had indeed been devastated, but for different reasons than I expected. She blamed herself for not seeing the signs, for not protecting me from what she now viewed as obvious predators. "I should have known," she kept saying when she came to help me pack up the apartment. Jessica was always too charming, too smooth. And Marcus, those late nights, the phone calls, the way he'd been acting about the wedding. I should have said something. I tried to reassure her that there was no way she could have known, that they'd been careful to hide their affair. But the guilt was eating at her, and I realized that their betrayal had ripples that extended far beyond just me. The practical aspects of canceling a wedding were overwhelming. There were vendor contracts to break, deposits to fight for, gifts to return. The wedding planner, bless her heart, had dealt with cancellations before, but never quite like this. She helped me navigate the logistics while also serving as an unofficial therapist, listening to me vent about the situation during our meetings. In 20 years of doing this job, she told me one afternoon as we worked through the catering cancellation, I've seen a lot of drama. But what you went through, what they put you through, that's next level betrayal. You handled it with more grace than most people would have. The financial hit was substantial. We lost several deposits entirely, and others required lengthy negotiations to recover even partial amounts. Marcus had promised to help with the costs, but when it came time to actually write checks, he became evasive and difficult to reach. It was just another reminder that his word meant nothing. My workplace became an unexpected source of support. I'd been dreading having to explain why I was suddenly single and weddingless, but my colleagues rallied around me in ways I hadn't expected. My boss, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd been through her own share of relationship disasters, called me into her office the Monday after the rehearsal dinner. "I heard what happened," she said simply. "Take whatever time you need. When you're ready to talk about it, I'm here. When you're ready to throw yourself into work as a distraction, I've got projects for you. Whatever you need." It was exactly what I needed to hear. Work became my refuge, a place where I could focus on problems that had solutions, where my competence and intelligence were valued, where I could rebuild my confidence one successful project at a time. But the nights were hard. The apartment I'd shared with Marcus felt haunted by memories of our relationship. Every corner held reminders of our life together. The couch we'd picked out together, the kitchen table where we'd planned our future, the bedroom where we'd talked about having kids someday. I started staying late at the office just to avoid going home. When I finally did, I'd put on Netflix or music, anything to fill the silence. The loneliness was crushing, not just because I missed Marcus, but because I missed the version of my life where I believed I was loved and cherished. The worst part was the way the betrayal had poisoned my memories. Moments I'd treasured, romantic dinners, lazy Sunday mornings, conversations about our dreams, now felt tainted by the knowledge that he'd been lying to me. Had any of it been real? Had he ever actually loved me? Or had I just been convenient? Jessica's behavior in the aftermath was particularly disturbing. Rather than disappearing in shame, she seemed to be doubling down on her victim narrative. Through mutual friends, I heard that she was telling people I'd overreacted to what she called a complicated situation. She'd apparently crafted a story where she and Marcus had fallen genuinely in love, but were trying to figure out how to handle it without hurting me. In her version, they were the tragic lovers kept apart by circumstances, and I was the obstacle preventing true love from flourishing. The audacity was breathtaking. She'd managed to reframe a months-long affair as a romantic love story, with herself as the heroine and me as the villain. Some people, particularly those who didn't know the full story or hadn't been at the rehearsal dinner, seemed to be buying it. I started hearing whispers at social events, comments about how complicated the situation was, how there were 3 sides to every story. It was maddening. I had concrete evidence of their betrayal, months of text messages proving they'd been lying and manipulating me. But somehow, in some circles, that evidence was being dismissed in favor of Jessica's more palatable narrative. The social fallout was swift and decisive. Our friend group, which had been tightly knit since college, split down the middle. Most people sided with me once they heard the full story, but a few remained loyal to Jessica. It was painful to lose friendships I'd valued, but it was also clarifying. The people who could excuse that kind of betrayal weren't people I wanted in my life anyway. One particularly painful loss was my friendship with Rachel, who had been in our college sorority with Jessica and me. Rachel had been at the rehearsal dinner, had heard me read the messages aloud, but somehow still felt that I'd handled it wrong. "I'm not saying what they did was right," she told me during a tense phone conversation a few weeks later. "But did you really have to humiliate them like that in front of everyone? Couldn't you have handled it privately? I was stunned. Rachel, they humiliated me for months. They made a fool of me while planning my own wedding. They called me names and laughed about my life behind my back. But somehow I'm the bad guy for telling the truth? It just seems so vindictive. She said, so unlike you, the Sarah I know would have handled this with more class. That conversation was a revelation. Rachel wasn't really concerned about class or dignity. She was uncomfortable with the idea that betrayal should have consequences, that actions should be met with accountability. She wanted me to handle my pain quietly, privately, in a way that didn't make waves or create awkwardness for other people. I realized that this attitude was part of what had enabled Marcus and Jessica's behavior in the first place. They'd counted on my desire to avoid confrontation, my tendency to smooth things over and keep the peace. They'd assumed I'd be too polite, too concerned about appearances, to call them out publicly. They'd been wrong, and apparently that made some people more uncomfortable than the actual betrayal had. My therapist, Dr. Martinez, helped me work through these complicated feelings. I'd started seeing her a week after the rehearsal dinner, initially just to process the immediate trauma of the betrayal. But our sessions quickly expanded to cover broader themes about trust, self-worth, and boundary setting. What you did took tremendous courage, she told me during one of our early sessions. You refused to be silenced or shamed. You demanded accountability. Those are signs of strength, not weakness. She helped me understand that the people criticizing my response were often dealing with their own discomfort about confrontation and conflict. It was easier to blame me for causing drama than to sit with the uncomfortable reality that people they knew were capable of such cruelty. Abusers and manipulators rely on their victims' desire to maintain social harmony, Dr. Martinez explained. They count on people being more upset by the exposure of bad behavior than by the bad behavior itself. When you refuse to play that game, it makes people confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and others. The therapy sessions became a lifeline. For the first time in months, I had a space where my feelings were validated, where I could express anger and hurt without being told I was being too dramatic or vindictive. 3 months after the rehearsal dinner, I made the decision to move. The apartment I'd shared with Marcus had too many painful associations, and I was ready for a fresh start. I found a beautiful one-bedroom place in South Austin, close to Zilker Park and the trail I'd started running on. The move was cathartic. I got rid of furniture that reminded me of Marcus, redecorated with pieces that reflected my own taste, and created a space that was entirely mine. For the first time in years, I wasn't compromising on paint colors or furniture styles. I could have exactly what I wanted. My new neighborhood was full of young professionals and artists. I started going to local coffee shops and farmers markets, slowly building a new routine that had nothing to do with my old life. I joined a running club and made friends who knew nothing about my dramatic breakup story. Work continued to be a source of stability and growth. The promotion I'd been hoping for came through 6 months after the wedding that never was. My boss told me that my handling of a difficult client situation had impressed the senior partners. You've shown real resilience and professionalism during what I know has been a challenging time, she said during my review. That kind of grace under pressure is exactly what we're looking for in leadership roles. The recognition felt good, but more importantly, it reminded me that I was capable and valuable independent of any romantic relationship. My worth isn't tied to being someone's fiancé or wife. I had my own career, my own goals, my own life. Dating was the furthest thing from my mind for most of that first year. The idea of trusting someone new, of being vulnerable again, felt impossible. But slowly, as I worked through my trauma in therapy and rebuilt my sense of self, I started to feel open to the possibility of connection again. I met David at a charity 5K run in the spring. He was volunteering at the water station, cheerfully encouraging runners as they passed by. Something about his genuine smile and easy laugh caught my attention. When I finished the race, I found myself walking back to thank the volunteers, though really I was hoping to talk to him again. "Great race," he said when he saw me approaching. "You looked strong out there. How'd it feel?" We started talking about running, then about the charity the race was supporting, then about our jobs and our lives. The conversation flowed naturally, without any of the forced chemistry I'd experienced on the few awkward dates I'd been on since Marcus. David was a teacher at a local elementary school, passionate about education and working with kids. He was funny and kind, with an optimism that felt genuine rather than naive. When he asked if I'd like to get coffee sometime, I surprised myself by saying yes. Our first date was at a small cafe near my apartment. I'd been nervous beforehand, worried about how much to share about my past, about whether I was ready for this. But David had a way of making me feel comfortable, of asking questions that showed he was really listening to my answers. I told him about the canceled wedding early on, not all the details, but the basic facts. His response was perfect. Sympathy for what I'd been through, but no pity or dramatic reactions. He treated it as part of my history, not as something that defined me. That must have been incredibly painful, he said simply. I'm sorry you went through that, but I'm also impressed by how you handled it. It takes real strength to stand up for yourself like that. We dated slowly, carefully. I was honest about my trust issues, about my need to take things at my own pace. David was patient and understanding, never pushing for more than I was ready to give. 6 months into our relationship, I ran into Marcus at a grocery store. It was the first time I'd seen him since our coffee shop conversation, and I was struck again by how much he'd changed. He looked older, more worn down, like the weight of his choices was physically aging him. "Sarah," he said when he spotted me in the produce section. "How are you?" "I'm good," I said, and realized it was true. Really good. We made small talk for a few minutes. He mentioned that he'd been in therapy, that he was trying to work on himself. He looked genuinely remorseful, not just sorry for himself, but actually ashamed of his actions. "I heard you're seeing someone," he said eventually. "I'm glad. You deserve to be happy." It was a strange moment, talking civilly with someone who had caused me so much pain, but I felt nothing toward him except a distant sort of pity. The anger and hurt had faded, replaced by indifference. As I drove home from the store, I realized how much I'd changed. A year ago, seeing Marcus would have sent me into an emotional spiral. Now he was just someone I used to know, someone who belonged to a different chapter of my life. The legal aftermath of our broken engagement had been messy but ultimately resolved. With the help of a lawyer, I'd recovered most of the money I'd lost on wedding deposits. Marcus had initially fought paying his share, but when his own lawyer explained the potential consequences of his breach of promise, he'd eventually cooperated. I used some of the recovered money to take a solo trip to Europe, something I'd always wanted to do but had put off for various reasons. 2 weeks in Italy and France, traveling at my own pace, eating what I wanted, seeing what interested me. It was liberating in a way I hadn't expected. Standing in the Louvre, looking at paintings I dreamed of seeing since college, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, not for what had happened to me, but for who I'd become in response to it. The woman who could travel alone confidently, who could trust her own judgment, who could build a life entirely on her own terms. Jessica's attempts to rehabilitate her image had largely failed. The evidence I'd presented was too concrete, too damaging. Most of our mutual friends had cut ties with her, and she'd eventually moved to Dallas, presumably to start fresh where fewer people knew her story. I heard through the grapevine that she'd tried to reconnect with Marcus after the dust settled, but he'd apparently wanted nothing to do with her. He'd realized, perhaps too late, that she'd manipulated him as much as she'd manipulated me. She'd played us against each other for her own entertainment, with no real affection for either of us. The whole experience had taught me valuable lessons about recognizing manipulation and gaslighting. In therapy, I'd learned to identify the tactics they'd used, the way they'd made me doubt my own perceptions, the way they'd turned my concerns back on me, the way they'd coordinated their stories to make me feel crazy. I'd also learned to trust my instincts. That gut feeling I'd had in the weeks before the wedding, the sense that something was wrong, I'd been right. I'd learned not to dismiss those feelings in the future, not to gaslight myself when something didn't feel right. Dr. Martinez and I had worked extensively on rebuilding my ability to trust both others and myself. It was a gradual process, but I'd slowly learned to open my heart again while maintaining healthy boundaries. My relationship with David had been a huge part of that healing. He'd shown me what honest, consistent love looked like. There were no games, no mixed signals, no need to decode his behavior or wonder about his motives. He was exactly who he appeared to be, kind, reliable, and genuinely caring. We'd been together for 8 months when he told me he loved me. We were cooking dinner together in my apartment, something that had become a Sunday tradition. I was chopping vegetables while he stirred sauce on the stove, and he just said it naturally, without fanfare. "I love you, Sarah." The words didn't send me into a panic the way I'd feared they might. Instead, I felt a warm sense of rightness, of being exactly where I belonged. "I love you too," I said, and meant it completely. David had been incredibly patient with my trust issues. There were moments early in our relationship when I'd catch myself looking for signs of deception, analyzing his words for hidden meanings, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But David's consistency slowly wore down my defenses. When he said he'd call, he called. When he made plans, he kept them. When I asked him direct questions, he gave me direct answers. It was such a stark contrast to the last months with Marcus, where every interaction had felt like a puzzle I needed to solve. The most healing part of our relationship was how David handled conflict. The first time we disagreed about something, where to go for dinner, nothing major, I braced myself for manipulation, for him to make me feel crazy for having a different opinion. Instead, he listened to my perspective, shared his own, and we compromised. No gaslighting, no making me feel stupid for my preferences, no subtle punishment for disagreeing with him. It was such a foreign concept to me that I actually brought it up in therapy. Healthy relationships don't require you to sacrifice your reality, Dr. Martinez had told me. You should be able to disagree with someone you love without feeling like you're losing your mind. 8 months into our relationship, David and I started talking about the future. Not in the desperate, clinging way I'd planned my future with Marcus, but in a calm, confident way that felt sustainable. We talked about moving in together, about traveling, about what we wanted our lives to look like. The conversation that really showed me how much I'd changed happened on a lazy Saturday morning. We were lying in bed, and David mentioned that his college roommate was getting married next summer. "Would you want to go with me?" he asked. "It's in Colorado, so we could make a whole weekend of it." A year ago, the mention of someone else's wedding would have sent me into a spiral of painful memories. But lying there with David, I felt nothing but excitement about the trip. "I'd love to," I said, and realized I meant it. I wasn't afraid of weddings anymore. I wasn't bitter about other people's happiness. I'd healed enough to celebrate love again, even if my own journey to it had been messier than I'd planned. That evening, I called my sister to tell her about the wedding invitation. We'd grown closer throughout this whole ordeal, and she'd become one of my strongest supporters. "Sarah, that's wonderful," she said when I told her about David's friend's wedding. "Are you nervous about it at all?" "Not really," I said, surprising myself. "I think I'm actually looking forward to it. I want to see David in his element with his college friends. And honestly, I love weddings when they're celebrating real love." "I'm so proud of you," she said, her voice getting emotional. "A year ago, I was so worried about you. You were so broken after everything that happened. But look at you now. You're stronger than ever. You're in love with someone who deserves you. And you're not bitter. You're not letting what Marcus and Jessica did define the rest of your life." Her words made me tear up, but they were happy tears. She was right. I had come so far from the devastated woman who discovered her fiancé's affair just over a year ago. The anniversary of what would have been my wedding day came and went without much fanfare. David knew about the date, but he didn't make a big deal about it. He simply made sure to be extra attentive that day, bringing me my favorite coffee and suggesting we spend the evening doing something that made me happy. We ended up at a local art gallery opening, surrounded by creative energy and beautiful work. As we walked through the exhibits, I realized I wasn't thinking about Marcus or Jessica or what might have been. I was fully present in my actual life, appreciating art with someone who genuinely cared about me. The legal closure had been important, but the emotional closure was even more significant. I'd stopped checking up on Marcus or Jessica through social media. I'd stopped wondering what they were doing or whether they were happy. Their lives had become irrelevant to mine, which felt like the ultimate victory. My work life had continued to flourish as well. The promotion I'd received had led to more opportunities, and I was now managing a team of junior marketing coordinators. I found that my experience with betrayal and recovery had actually made me a better manager. I was more attuned to people's emotional needs, better at reading between the lines when someone was struggling. One of my team members, a recent college graduate named Emma, reminded me of myself at that age. She was eager, talented, but also insecure and prone to self-doubt. I found myself mentoring her in ways that went beyond just work skills. "Trust your instincts," I told her during one of our weekly check-ins, when she was second-guessing a creative decision. "You're smarter than you think you are. Don't let anyone make you doubt your own judgment." The advice felt heavy with personal meaning. If I could save one young woman from the kind of manipulation I'd experienced, from the self-doubt that had nearly consumed me, then maybe some good had come from my pain. My relationship with my parents had also deepened through this experience. They'd seen me at my lowest point and watched me rebuild myself from the ground up. My father, who'd always been protective but sometimes distant, had become much more emotionally available. "I'm proud of how you handled everything," he told me during a family dinner a few months after I'd started dating David. "You could have let it make you bitter, but you chose to grow from it instead. That takes real character." My mother had worked through her own guilt about not seeing the signs of Marcus and Jessica's betrayal. Through family therapy sessions, we'd learned to communicate better about difficult topics. She'd stopped blaming herself for what happened and started focusing on supporting my healing. The relationship with David's family had been a revelation as well. His parents were warm, genuine people who welcomed me without drama or ulterior motives. Family dinners at their house were relaxed affairs where I never felt like I was performing or walking on eggshells. David's mother, Linda, had a way of making everyone feel included and valued. She asked genuine questions about my work and my interests, not the performative small talk I'd grown used to in social situations. She reminded me that families could be sources of support rather than stress. "David talks about you all the time," she told me during one of our dinners. "He's happier than I've seen him in years. You're good for each other." It was the kind of uncomplicated approval I'd craved with Marcus's family, but had never quite achieved. With David's family, I didn't have to prove myself or compete for attention. I could just be myself. The running club I joined had become another source of community and growth. Training for races gave me concrete goals to work toward, and the physical challenge helped me process emotions in a healthy way. The endorphins from long runs had been better than any antidepressant. My running partner, a woman named Melissa who was training for her first marathon, had become a close friend. She knew the basics of my story, but didn't treat me like a victim or a source of drama. She was just a good friend who pushed me to run faster and listened when I needed to vent about work or life. "You know what I admire about you?" she said during one of our long runs around Lady Bird Lake. "You don't let your past define your future. You learned from what happened, but you didn't let it make you cynical." Her observation hit me deeply. It was true. I could have let Marcus and Jessica's betrayal turn me into someone bitter and suspicious. Instead, I'd chosen to use it as information about what I didn't want in my life, while remaining open to what I did want. The therapy with Dr. Martinez had been transformational, but after 18 months, we decided I was ready to graduate from regular sessions. I now saw her quarterly for maintenance, but I developed the tools I needed to navigate challenges on my own. "You've done incredible work," she told me during our last regular session. "You came in here shattered, unable to trust your own perceptions. Now you're in a healthy relationship, you've rebuilt your career, and most importantly, you've reclaimed your sense of self. That's not easy to do." The work hadn't been easy. There had been setbacks, moments when the trauma felt overwhelming, times when I'd wondered if I'd ever feel normal again. But persistence had paid off. I'd slowly rebuilt my life piece by piece, creating something stronger and more authentic than what I'd had before. The biggest test of my healing came when David and I decided to move in together. Combining our lives in such a concrete way brought up all my old fears about vulnerability and trust. What if he changed once we were living together? What if I'd missed red flags again? But David's consistency remained unchanged. He was the same loving, reliable partner, whether we were spending one night together or planning to share a lease. Moving in together was a natural progression, not a source of anxiety. Our apartment hunting process was fun rather than stressful. We looked for a place that felt like both of us, somewhere we could build new memories together. When we found a charming 2-bedroom house with a big kitchen and a yard for the dog David wanted to adopt, it felt like coming home. The housewarming party we threw became a celebration of more than just our new living situation. It was a celebration of my new life, surrounded by friends who valued honesty and loyalty, with a partner who respected and cherished me. Looking around at the people laughing in our living room, I felt overwhelmed with gratitude. My sister gave a toast that night that brought tears to my eyes. To Sarah and David, may your love story be everything you both deserve. And Sarah, I'm so proud of the woman you've become. You turned the worst betrayal into the greatest growth, and now you're living your best life. The room erupted in cheers, and David squeezed my hand. I thought about how different the celebration was from what my wedding reception would have been. This was real, authentic joy shared with people who genuinely cared about our happiness. Later that night, after all our friends had gone home and we were cleaning up paper plates and empty wine glasses, David pulled me into his arms in our new kitchen. "Happy?" he asked, looking into my eyes. "Incredibly," I said, and meant it with every fiber of my being. 2 years after the rehearsal dinner that changed my life, I can honestly say I'm grateful for everything that happened. Not because I enjoyed the pain, it was the worst experience of my life, but because it forced me to become someone stronger, someone who knows her worth and won't accept less than she deserves. I learned that love shouldn't require you to doubt your own reality. It shouldn't make you feel crazy or insecure or like you're constantly walking on eggshells. Real love is steady, honest, and secure. It builds you up rather than tearing you down. I learned that sometimes the people who seem the most charming and trustworthy are the ones capable of the deepest betrayal. But I also learned that not everyone is like that. There are genuinely good people in the world who will treat your heart with the care it deserves. Most importantly, I learned that I am capable of rebuilding my life from scratch. When everything I thought I knew about my future crumbled, I found the strength to create something better. I trusted my instincts, demanded accountability, and refused to accept less than I deserved. Sometimes people ask me if I regret exposing Marcus and Jessica the way I did, if I think it was too dramatic, too public, too harsh, if I wish I'd handled it more privately, more quietly. My answer is always the same. I regret trusting people who didn't deserve it. I regret ignoring red flags because I wanted to believe in a fairy tale. I regret wasting years of my life on someone who saw me as a convenience rather than a partner. But I don't regret telling the truth. I don't regret refusing to be gaslit and manipulated. I don't regret standing up for myself in front of everyone who mattered to me. They wanted me to suffer in silence, to smile and go through with the wedding while they laughed behind my back. They wanted me to be the clueless, compliant woman to client woman who never questioned their stories, who absorbed their cruelty and kept their secrets. Instead, I chose to be the woman who demands respect, who refuses to accept lies, who isn't afraid to burn down a false paradise to build something real and lasting. That night at the rehearsal dinner, I didn't just cancel a wedding. I canceled a future built on deception and chose to build a new one, based on truth, respect, and genuine love. It was the best decision I ever made. Some people say revenge is a dish best served cold. I say the truth is a dish best served in front of everyone who needs to hear it, while it's still hot and undeniable. Marcus and Jessica thought they were so clever, so careful, so in control. They thought I was too naive and trusting to ever figure it out. They thought my love for them would make me complicit in my own betrayal. They were wrong about me. They were wrong about a lot of things. And now everyone knows it. The most beautiful part of this whole experience has been discovering who I really am when I'm not trying to be what someone else wants me to be. Without Marcus's subtle criticisms and expectations, without Jessica's competitive energy and backhanded comments, I've been able to become fully myself. I'm stronger than I thought I was. I'm braver than I believed. I'm capable of building a life that's entirely my own, filled with people who value honesty and loyalty and genuine connection. The fairy tale I thought I wanted, the white dress, the perfect wedding, the traditional happy ending, was never really mine. It was a story I'd been told to want, a script I'd been following without questioning whether it actually fit my life. The real fairy tale is the one I'm living now, a story about a woman who refused to accept less than she deserved, who chose truth over comfort, and who built something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal. This is my happy ending, and I wrote it myself. David and I are talking about getting engaged soon. When it happens, it will be because we both choose each other every day, not because we're following a timeline or trying to prove something to anyone else. Our love story may have started later than I originally planned, but it's infinitely more real than the fantasy I was living before. And when we do get married, whether it's in a small ceremony with just our families or a big celebration with all our friends, it will be a celebration of genuine love, built on honesty and respect and mutual admiration. No secrets, no lies, no hidden agendas. Just two people who found each other after learning what they really needed, promising to build a life together based on truth. That's the kind of love story worth telling. That's the kind of happy ending worth having. Thank you for listening to my story. If you take anything from it, let it be this. You deserve love that doesn't make you question your sanity. You deserve someone who chooses you openly and consistently, not someone who keeps you as a secret or treats you like a convenience. Trust your instincts. Demand accountability. Don't accept less than you deserve. And if someone tries to make you the villain for refusing to stay silent about their betrayal, remember that the truth is always worth telling, no matter how uncomfortable it makes other people. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. You matter. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. It was a strange moment, talking civilly with someone who had caused me so much pain, but I felt nothing toward him except a distant sort of pity. The anger and hurt had faded, replaced by indifference. As I drove home from the store, I realized how much I'd changed. A year ago, seeing Marcus would have sent me into an emotional spiral. Now he was just someone I used to know, someone who belonged to a different chapter of my life. The legal aftermath of our broken engagement had been messy, but ultimately resolved. With the help of a lawyer, I'd recovered most of the money I'd lost on wedding deposits. Marcus had initially fought paying his share, but when his own lawyer explained the potential consequences of his breach of promise, he'd eventually cooperated. I used some of the recovered money to take a solo trip to Europe, something I'd always wanted to do but had put off for various reasons. 2 weeks in Italy and France, traveling at my own pace, eating what I wanted, seeing what interested me. It was liberating in a way I hadn't expected. Standing in the Louvre, looking at paintings I dreamed of seeing since college, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, not for what had happened to me, but for who I'd become in response to it. The woman who could travel alone confidently, who could trust her own judgment, who could build a life entirely on her own terms. Jessica's attempts to rehabilitate her image had largely failed. The evidence I'd presented was too concrete, too damaging. Most of our mutual friends had cut ties with her, and she'd eventually moved to Dallas, presumably to start fresh, where fewer people knew her story. I heard through the grapevine that she'd tried to reconnect with Marcus after the dust settled, but he'd apparently wanted nothing to do with her. He'd realized, perhaps too late, that she'd manipulated him as much as she'd manipulated me. She'd played us against each other for her own entertainment, with no real affection for either of us. The whole experience had taught me valuable lessons about recognizing manipulation and gaslighting. In therapy, I'd learned to identify the tactics they'd used, The way they'd made me doubt my own perceptions. The way they'd turned my concerns back on me. The way they'd coordinated their stories to make me feel crazy. I'd also learned to trust my instincts. That gut feeling I'd had in the weeks before the wedding, the sense that something was wrong. I'd been right. I'd learned not to dismiss those feelings in the future. Not to gaslight myself when something didn't feel right. Dr. Martinez and I had worked extensively on rebuilding my ability to trust, both others and myself. It was a gradual process, but I'd slowly learned to open my heart again while maintaining healthy boundaries. My relationship with David had been a huge part of that healing. He'd shown me what honest, consistent love looked like. There were no games, no mixed signals, no need to decode his behavior or wonder about his motives. He was exactly who he appeared to be, kind, reliable, and genuinely caring. We'd been together for 8 months when he told me he loved me. We were cooking dinner together in my apartment, something that had become a Sunday tradition. I was chopping vegetables while he stirred sauce on the stove, and he just said it naturally, without fanfare. "I love you, Sarah." The words didn't send me into a panic the way I'd feared they might. Instead, I felt a warm sense of rightness, of being exactly where I belonged. "I love you too," I said, and meant it completely. A year later, I'm in a completely different place than I could have imagined during those dark weeks after the rehearsal dinner. David and I are talking about moving in together, maybe getting a house with a yard where we can host barbecues for our friends. I've been promoted again at work, and I'm being considered for a partnership track. I run regularly now, something that started as stress relief, but has become a genuine passion. I've completed 2 half marathons, and I'm training for my first full marathon in the fall. The physical challenge has been incredibly healing, a reminder that I'm strong, that I can push through difficult things, that I can accomplish goals I set for myself. My relationship with my family has grown stronger through this experience. Going through something so painful together, supporting each other through the aftermath, has created a deeper bond between us. My parents have fully embraced David, and he's become a regular fixture at family gatherings. Sometimes people ask me if I regret exposing Marcus and Jessica the way I did, if I think it was too dramatic, too public, too harsh, if I wish I'd handled it more privately, more quietly. My answer is always the same. I regret trusting people who didn't deserve it. I regret ignoring red flags because I wanted to believe in a fairy tale. I regret wasting years of my life on someone who saw me as a convenience rather than a partner. But I don't regret telling the truth. I don't regret refusing to be gaslit and manipulated. I don't regret standing up for myself in front of everyone who mattered to me. They wanted me to suffer in silence, to smile and go through with the wedding while they laughed behind my back. They wanted me to be the clueless, compliant woman who never questioned their story, who absorbed their cruelty and kept their secrets. Instead, I chose to be the woman who demands respect, who refuses to accept lies, who isn't afraid to burn down a false paradise to build something real and lasting. That night at the rehearsal dinner, I didn't just cancel a wedding. I canceled a future built on deception and chose to build a new one based on truth, respect, and genuine love. It was the best decision I ever made. Some people say revenge is a dish best served cold. I say the truth is a dish best served in front of everyone who needs to hear it while it's still hot and undeniable. Marcus and Jessica thought they were so clever, so careful, so in control. They thought I was too naive and trusting to ever figure it out. They thought my love for them would make me complicit in my own betrayal. They were wrong about me. They were wrong about a lot of things. And now everyone knows it. The most beautiful part of this whole experience has been discovering who I really am when I'm not trying to be what someone else wants me to be. Without Marcus's subtle criticisms and expectations, without Jessica's competitive energy and backhanded comments, I've been able to become fully myself. I'm stronger than I thought I was. I'm braver than I believed. I'm capable of building a life that's entirely my own, filled with people who value honesty and loyalty and genuine connection. The fairy tale I thought I wanted, the white dress, the perfect wedding, the traditional happy ending, was never really mine. It was a story I'd been told to want, a script I'd been following without questioning whether it actually fit my life. The real fairy tale is the one I'm living now. A story about a woman who refused to accept less than she deserved, who chose truth over comfort, who built something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal. This is my happy ending, and I wrote it myself.